Hello, and welcome to the Futurum Tech Webcast interview series. I'm Shelley Kramer, Principal Analyst here at Futurum Research. And on today's episode, I'm joined by Angela Lepelley, the Sales Director, AI and Automation at Five9. And we're going to dive into a topic today that is steadily growing in importance, and that's the topic of AI in the contact center and some of the amazing things that we're able to do as a result of integrating AI into the contact center. Before we get there, though, I want to talk a little bit about contact centers. And, one thing that I say whenever I bring up customer experience and whenever I talk about contact centers is that no human being ever wakes up and says, I can't wait to call or contact a contact center. I'm so excited about this. I really look forward to everybody dreads this, right? But yet it's a reality of our life and about all of our lives. And so whether we're making contact by phone, by video, by chat, by email, whatever else, it's kind of a dreaded task. And so I think that as a vendor in this space, I feel pretty confident that one of the things that, Five9 and your team thinks about on the regular is how do we make that experience less onerous for our customers? And how do we also make everything having to do with performing a contact center job less onerous for our employees? So that's a big challenge, right?
Mhm.
But it's so important, and we know that customer experience is a top priority for businesses, as it should be. So our conversation today will really be focused on, how can we make contact centers better? And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about. So Angela, welcome. I'm so glad to
Thank
have you. I
you.
love this topic.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So before we dive into talking about AI in the contact center,
Mhm.
I always love to hear about people's, sort of personal career journeys. So tell us a little bit about your path from, your career path and a little bit then about your role at Five9.
Mhm. Yeah, interesting to hear you say, the contact center when you say what you do isn't always, the most exciting thing. But really, if I think about the last 20 years, I started doing engineering at university. At one point, I was going to go to medical school. I kind of ended up in this career almost sort of by mistake.
Right.
And I've spent 20 years, working through various roles in, always around the contact center in technical roles. And more recently, really focusing on those elements of AI that are related to the contact center. And I think what's interesting to think about is, these elements used to be areas that people were innovating, it was testing and learning. And now, if you look at a modern contact center, they really are in kind of every part of it. It's really infused in every step of the journey. And, it's a very exciting space to be in. It's evolving all the time. We used to have sort of incremental changes and incremental, gains within the contact center. The last few years, it has absolutely exploded. I don't think anybody really anticipated the changes that we've had, through cloud adoption, but
Right.
really this real shift of using AI within the environment. It's it's an exciting place to be now.
And as a consumer, it's funny, every time I have an experience with a contact center that's an amazing experience, I'm a tech geek, so I pay attention. I pay a lot of attention. And actually,
Mhm.
I'm the customer who will, who will email customer service after the fact and say, this happened and it was really terrible, or this happened and it was really great, or whatever. But I do think that, from a customer experience standpoint, when I personally experience situations where I know that AI is driving part of my interaction and I can see the
Mhm.
efficiencies and I can see whether it's, sort of leading me to a quick do it yourself situation or something like that. It's just like, oh, this is so awesome, and you appreciate it so much. And I think it's also, in many ways it's a competitive advantage. I mean, when you're evaluating contact center solutions, things that make everyone's lives easier, more efficient, more productive on the contact center staff side. I think all of those
Mhm.
things are really, really important. So let's talk a little bit about um, the nuances of how AI can be used in the contact center?
Mhm. Well, I think some of the recent data I was looking at was that two-thirds of all contact centers now have some form of AI within them. But really, where we see the biggest focus is around the field of conversational AI. So that's
Okay.
the world of virtual agents. And, the likes of you and I will know that mostly from, it's speaking to technology, really. The Alexa was launched, I think, in 2014. This was our first introduction to, as consumers, being able to use voice to interact with everyday organizations.
Right.
But you're talking about it being an easy way to interact. I think that's key. And I think we're constantly surrounded by a little hindrance, I suppose, because speech, if you think about the evolution of, a typical inbound experience into a contact center, we're all very well aware of, traditional IVRs with touch tone keypads and
Right.
being faced with menus that have options that it's not relevant to you. They're very frustrating. A lot of those were speech enabled. We've been doing speech enabled IVRs for 15, 20 years, and that's a form of AI. And I think this is sort of holding it back a little bit because people think that that is what a conversational interface is. But really, where what has changed dramatically in the last few years is that these technologies are now infused with this AI capability, which is the ability to use natural language. So you can speak freely, you can use your own words, and the technology can pick out really the meaning from that, the context, the intent, what it is you're trying to get done, and pick out words and parts of that conversation to really have a much more natural experience to complete a task.
That's awesome. And so, what does this technology work alongside the humans in the contact center? Is there a point where the AI says, "Oops, I can't. I can no longer process what this customer is looking for," and is there kind of like a seamless handoff or something like that?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of conversational interfaces being used for automation, so doing some of those tasks that a human agent might have done.
Yeah.
But really, before we get to the point of automation, they're very useful in just answering a call and understanding who you are and what it is you're trying to achieve, and then handing that over to the right
Right.
place. That could be automation, but it could equally be, passing that to self-service application.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, I want to talk a little bit about what's driving adoption of AI in the contact center.
Mm.
Now, we're coming out of 2 years of a global pandemic, and not
Mhm.
it's funny every time I say that it's like it's not over. But I think that uh, navigating a global pandemic taught us a lot of important business
Mhm.
decisions, and one of which is I don't think anybody ever manages to forget the important role that a contact center plays in pretty much all business operations, right? But I think a global pandemic sort of intensified that, and it intensified in many ways a move to the cloud. Right,
Mhm.
we had to pivot customer service teams, contact center teams to work from home. So businesses who were already utilizing the cloud were sort of in a prime position, right? But what other a global pandemic, a shift to work from home,
Mhm.
talent recruitment issues and things like that. Tell me about
Mm.
what you're seeing in terms of some of the things that on your end that are truly driving adoption in the contact center of AI, rather, in the contact
Yeah.
center.
I mean, there's a few different areas that are driving adoption. I think, you've reflected on the pandemic, this forced everyone to do things in quite different ways. If we look at retail, they had to close their shops, lots of face-to-face options dropped off. And
Right,
rightly, as you say, the contact center almost became the face and the front door of many organizations.
right,
And we saw this, influx of interactions, influx of calls. We had demand increase in those, that contact centers couldn't handle that demand. And I think that did give way to people maybe rushing quite quickly at some of the automation elements of using AI. But I think I still think, the main reason that the adoption of this is happening so quickly, it's customers, it's us demanding a better service.
Right.
I think us as consumers, are the way that we want to interact is changing. We want
Right.
always on services. We want easy access 24 hours a day. We're definitely moving towards a trend of consumers wanting to self-serve. So
Exactly.
often I get asked, this is just, we're just putting some technology in the way of speaking to a human. But really look at all the research, and customers, when it's something simple, a simple transactional task, you just want to get your balance, or you want to make a payment or reset a password. These things we don't want to speak to a human about. We want to just
Right.
get them done really quickly.
Right.
And the best way to do that is, through some kind of conversational chatbot or virtual agent.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. These internet machines that we carry around in our hands all day, every day, have taught us that the answer to our
Mhm.
questions is right here. And so being able, and I think that that's also, the proliferation of mobile devices also plays a role, right?
Mhm.
I don't want
Mhm.
to wait until I'm sitting in front of my laptop or in my office or whatever to get done what I need to do. I want to be able to use my mobile device and get whatever problem I have solved, whatever information I need. And I think you're absolutely correct in terms of our desire as consumers to solve the problems we can solve ourselves because it's so much faster.
Mm.
I mean, we know how to navigate, and on I mean most of us, right? And there of course are many people who, elderly people, things like that, who have more difficulty. But the reality of it is, many instances, our world is designed so that what we need to do, we need to do online, and we know how to navigate those interfaces. And so, what we're
Mm.
looking for is quick, seamless, efficient, productive processes. And when AI, I think, can help drive that it's noticeable,
Mhm.
right? It's definitely noticeable. And I think that competing on customer experience and customer service is something that we see a lot of today. The businesses of every kind, I don't care if you're in the B2B space or B2C space. I mean, commoditization and the risk of commoditization is everywhere. And I can buy whatever I need from Amazon, right? And nothing against Amazon. They're an amazing company, but if that's what you're competing against, and their ability to serve customers and quickly do the things that customers want, you need to be able to model that as well. Again, and I think that's
Yeah.
regardless of whether you're working in the B2B or B2C space. So,
Yeah,
um,
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I really agree with that point. If
yeah,
loyalty, I think, to brands in general is at an extreme low point.
right.
So competing on product is just no longer really something that
Yeah,
any brand is doing. We have to compete on the customer experience.
yeah,
One bad experience, we're all just not tolerating that anymore, not tolerating bad service. We can see it being done well
yeah,
in a lot of organizations. So and I think in the contact center, this is where we see the biggest pain point is when you have that first initial touch point with
right.
whether it is that kind of old IVR experience, or similarly, I think on websites where we see chatbots being delivered, it's sort of people expect to be able to pick up this technology, just program it up and put some FAQs in it, and oh, that felt simple, but actually doing it well, using conversational design and making these seamless, engaging experiences. You need to do this well. It needs to be joined up, and it needs to be really valuable to the end customer.
I'm a big proponent of the most senior executives throughout any organization having to walk through a newly designed, ready to launch customer experience process. Because so many times I know that you've done this. You're in an interface, you're trying to solve a problem. And again, nobody wakes up with a desire to, run to a contact center and try to solve a problem, right? So there's a reason something isn't right. That's why we're
Mhm.
in this situation, right? We're trying to fix it. But so many times I'll be involved in a process, a contact center process, and I'll just be so frustrated to go, oh my gosh. People at a senior level have not vetted this process. Somebody has not thought this all the way through. And sometimes it's as easy as doing sort of exercises that you assign to different members on your team to walk through the process to just sort of make sure that everything's vetted and that things do the things that they're supposed to do and you're thinking it through. And that's kind of truly one of my recommendations all the time when I talk to any contact center client is just make sure
Yeah.
even people at the most senior level whose job it is not to design these things, right? Because when it's just your design team or just the people who are close to it, sometimes we're
Oh.
so close to things that we overlook it, but it's those outside people or your partner or whatever, go through this process for me, tell me where the hangups are. I think that's really an
Mm.
important part of the design process.
It is, and I think, another element to that is just making these experiences join up.
Yeah.
You may have, typically when we look at, the digital world, you've got digital teams and people in marketing leading some of the design, clearly of
Right.
the digital space, like the website, and that might have flowed onto design of a chatbot, but we know that about 70% of the interactions that come into a contact center are fallout from kind of failed web journeys or failed digital interactions.
Right.
And so making sure we have a really consistent experience in digital interfaces as we do when we call up the contact center and maybe with your phone is,
Right.
making sure those experiences are connected together. It's probably second biggest frustration is having to repeat information.
Yeah.
So, passing that context, making sure, a bot can translate that to a web chat agent and you can see all of the previous interaction. It's vital to the design.
Which as a customer is so important. There's
Mm.
not many things I loathe more than having to tell my story. Like I started out frustrated, right? Now that I've had to tell my story 5 times later, I find myself saying to a contact center agent, I'm really not upset with you. It's just this process that's frustrating me.
Exactly. Yeah, and remember, all of this technology is not just supporting the customer, because we talked about, the impact on the agent as well. They
No,
don't want to receive that angry caller. They
they
don't
don't
want
ever.
to do those, they would. The AI capability is not necessarily to automate full processes. I think, a lot of people talk about containment in the IVR and, taking
Yeah,
away the traffic, but really it's about them working together. We're moving towards, I think, a world where most interactions will not be fully automated, but they will be partially automated. So
right,
the front part of the interaction will be handled by some sort of bot, and then more often than not, we're going to need a human to finish that interaction and to give it that human touch that it needs. But the
right,
pieces of the interaction, being able to understand who they are, taking a policy number, verifying who you are, just collecting some information on the way in. There's simple things we can
right.
automate and enhance the experience, improve the experience, make it easier when it actually reaches an agent.
I'm all for that. So we're obviously both fans of AI and automation in the contact center.
Mhm.
But the reality of it is there are some very real things that sometimes get in the way for organizations. So Angela, that's what I'd
Mhm.
love to talk about next is what are some of the barriers that you see to adoption of AI in the contact center?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because I think most of the barriers that we previously had have pretty much dropped off. I think previously one of the biggest barriers used to be cost. If we look at kind of traditional, speech deployments, maybe just even a handful of years ago, they cost huge amounts of money. We had long deployment cycles.
Right,
They were quite lengthy deployments. You need coders and developers. All of that's really kind of melted away. Now it's all in the cloud. We've got low code, no code kind of environments that we can use to build them. The cost has come down, so it's really available to all. I think a lot of those barriers have come down. I think almost the biggest barrier is almost getting the knowledge out there that the technology really works. I think that sometimes our ability as consumers to use it hasn't quite caught up with the technology, if that makes sense.
yeah,
And that we still we're still faced with these kind of legacy chatbots and traditional IVRs and think that that's the experience. But when we see it designed well, when we see it, as you said, when you experience a seamless journey supported by AI, the technology works exceptionally well when it's designed and implemented well.
Right.
So yeah, I think I think just making sure that we're always focusing on the customer design, making that easy, engaging experiences, um, is where we need to focus. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, in the contact center, not everything can be automated, right? So,
Mhm.
if you're beginning a journey of thinking about integrating AI into your contact center, where do how do you know what can and can be automated? I will say that
Mhm.
my answer is always, I try within our own company, and when I'm advising other companies, I try to um, advise people not to think they need to reinvent the wheel. And what I mean by that is that, I think that we are at a time, I mentioned this briefly before, there's a dearth of tech talent. Organizations are stretched in terms of their IT teams and what they're handling. Um, Sometimes there's expertise internally, sometimes there's not. And for me, one of my biggest pieces of advice is find a trusted vendor partner, and rely on them, because
Mhm.
what they bring to the engagement is all of the trials and successes and not so successful things that happened, but they bring all of the experience that they've learned with other
Mhm.
customers that they're doing on a day-to-day basis, and they bring that to your engagement and your set of circumstances. And I think that for me, it shortens the time to adoption, it shortens the time to value, it shortens
Mhm.
the instances of frustration. So I'm a big fan of, when you're going down this path, figuring out, who the right trusted vendor partner is, and going that path. So I have a feeling that you're probably not going to disagree with me there.
No, I think that it's very wise words. As I said, this technology has become almost available to anyone. So, a lot of organizations have rushed at picking up these, easy development tools and creating
Right.
their own bots. And I think, coupled with the slight misconception that AI, conversational AI can do anything, it's
Right.
hugely powerful, but it's improving all the time. But I think the reality is, it is fairly complex. We're dealing with, speech recognition. We're dealing with synthesis of text. We're doing data. We're trying to understand language and really complex strings of communication, that people are speaking. It is actually, a fairly complex thing to get right. So, your advice of using a trusted vendor, absolutely. Starting small, absolutely. Starting
Mhm.
with things that that will work, that you test properly. You get it out in a small scale into the field, and you use real customers to interact with it, and
Right.
build that. And I think, engaging the organization you're working with from the very onset, and knowing that, it's a journey you're going to go on together, building these things. They're designed around the specific nuances of your organization, what your customers are saying, what needs they have, and how you can improve that. So
Mhm.
yeah, I think in terms of what's good to automate and what's not, clearly, looking at the simple to automate things, common small tasks that agents are doing day in, day out, that they don't really want to be doing, that are adding no value, that are really, really simple, like collecting that information on the way in, collecting intent, collecting ID, all those parts are, very, very simple for us to do. That's a good place to
Right.
start.
Right. Well, and I think you touched on this a little bit, but I think that really involving your internal team, especially
Mhm.
those individuals who are working closest to the customer in the contact center, in conversations around developing a strategy
Mhm.
for for what you're doing in the contact center, because they do these things all day, every day. And so I think
Hmm.
sometimes, we did some research a few years ago, and a lot of times when we do research surveys, our clients are interested in feedback at the executive level. And in this particular study, it was very different in that what this customer was interested in, what this client was interested in, was they were interested in feedback from more frontline and mid-level people within the organization about digital transformation and about automation and about how automation was changing the landscape of work and their work, and
Hmm.
what and one of the big pieces that came out of that research is that across the board, those employees were saying, we want to be more involved in these processes. We think we have something to contribute. So please don't leave us out of the equation. And I think that when you're talking about contact center, that's incredibly important to remember as well.
Yeah, definitely. And we've seen a lot of success with that. So if you think about how you train a virtual agent, it's a bit similar to how you train a real agent. You have to
Right.
give it some information, see how it goes, continually, train it up, feed it with more information, more data. And really the process to do that with this technology is to, look at the responses you get from the customer. You need to, train it with the right responses and the right information. And usually the best way to do that is to use some of the employees of that organization. We see that quite a lot where we,
Right.
take a group or take employees from the contact center to support that very process.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Really.
by their nature, these technologies, they are inherently the way that they are built are to sort of tune and optimize themselves as they go forward. So if you think about um, when we ask a customer, what can I do for you today? What they respond with, we may be able to start, gathering, the top intents, the top reasons why they're calling, and start to create some automated responses. But through those utterances, through the things that your customers are actually telling you that they want, we're able to use that information to then really inform the roadmap for continual improvement, building up the responses, more and more things that the virtual agent can do over time.
Right. Right. No, that's exciting. And I'm sure it's as exciting to agents overall, right? Contact center agents overall, as it is to
Mhm.
customers as well. So I think that, one of the things that my my advice always is, I asked a question here a few minutes ago, and I want to circle back and kind of add something
Mhm.
to it. How do organizations know what can and can't be automated? So
Mhm.
some of it is getting that internal feedback, some of it is trial and error, testing things and things like that.
Mhm.
Um, and I think really an important part of that equation is just to be strategic about it, right? And to be strategic and know that this is an automation strategy within the contact center, right? And so you
Mhm.
develop it in that way. And I think the other bit of advice, and I would love to know how you feel on this front. I actually personally don't, I think that going into it with a mindset that this is not a process, it's a journey. And there will be different steps along the way of this journey. There will be different iterations. And the reality of it is, if you're doing it right, the journey
Mhm.
is actually not ever going to be over, because and because technology continues to evolve, and when we stop and think, oh my gosh, look at all the changes that we've seen in the last decade, in the last 5 years, and we think, oh my goodness, well, the reality of it is that's not going to slow down, that's going to speed up, right? And so
Mhm.
I try to make sure that when I'm talking about these topics, that people understand that it is a journey. And the cool thing is that we can do this with AI in the contact center today. And that's going to continue to evolve as the technology changes and as new technology becomes available and those sorts of things, and again, that's, part of the reason I'm such a fan of strong vendor partner relationships, because when you invent the wheel and you try to do this yourself internally, you may or may not have the capabilities to stay on top of what's happening with the technology. You may not constantly be exploring and experimenting with and upgrading to, right, the newest technology. And so when you're working with a trusted vendor partner, that's part of the value proposition, right? You are out there, when I'm working with the team at Five9, I'm relying on you and your team to always have your finger on the pulse of what's happening and what innovative things that you're thinking about, or we can do, or we can integrate, or, oh, here's something we didn't think about but that's working great for another customer, things like that. But I do think going into this journey of contact center, and especially thinking about how we can integrate AI into our contact center operations and how that's a game changer, is understanding that it is a journey and this is a step on that journey.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with all of that. And since joining Five9, it is continually evolving all of the
Right,
time.
right,
We've talked a lot about virtual agents and chatbots today, but we kind of refer to that as sort of first wave of conversational AI. The
right,
second wave of that's now kind of emerging quite at pace is around supporting the agent with AI. You may have heard the
right,
term agent assist. Really, we're seeing that rise up now. Which is, I suppose, the AI listening to a live conversation. So,
right,
virtual agent being sort of pre-agent, the live conversation with an agent and listening into that, being able to suggest responses, surfacing knowledge, providing next best answers, even things like automating quality, transcribing, summaries of the call so they don't have
right.
to write their own notes. I mean, there's so many uses for this technology that really it's applicable to so many organizations and so many sectors. But yeah, the capabilities are just growing at pace that, I think we started this conversation with saying, almost every single touch point within the contact center, whether it's customer facing agent, whether it's supporting the business with analytics and, ongoing business improvement, it's really across, every touch point of it now, which is,
Right.
yeah, it's indistinguishable from, the contact center itself. It's just part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I'm glad you touched on, how AI it can be used to support contact center agents, because,
Mhm.
you know, we also know that we are in, across the world, there's a labor shortage.
Mhm.
And so, when you can use technology to make jobs more interesting, more attractive, provide, more career opportunities, opportunities for growth, opportunities for learning, that
Mm.
sort of thing. I think that's the kind of jobs that attract people. And I think that this isn't a technology conversation. This is and we talk about this all the time as it relates to digital transformation. Digital transformation isn't just technology. It's technology and processes and people and all of those things working together to deliver
Yeah.
better results. So,
Mm.
well, Angela, it's been such a pleasure hanging out with you today, and I so appreciate the insights that you've shared. This is an exciting time for contact center, right? And I'm
Mhm.
going to ask you to leave us, if you have one bit of advice for our viewing or listening audience who may be thinking about, contact center and how we can modernize our contact center operations. How, gosh, I wasn't thinking about the role AI could play, but now I am, because of this fascinating conversation. What's your one bit of
Mm.
advice you want to leave our audience with?
Well, I think your piece of advice about coming to a trusted vendor is absolutely key, because there's so much of the capability out there it needs that kind of thought. It needs knowledge. It needs people that have been through the experience and made the mistakes before you, really. But I think my top kind of key takeaway would be wherever you start your journey using AI, it should be always putting the customer first, the customer experience. And I think if you naturally look for where the pain points are in the customer journeys, call up your own IVR, call up your phone number of your organization, go on, use your own chatbot, walk the journeys that your customers walk, find those pain points and try and solve those first. And if we fix the problems in the customer, then all the natural efficiencies and benefits will flow from there.
Absolutely. Well, I cannot argue with that at all. So, Angela Lepelley, Sales Director, AI and Automation at Five9. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. For our audience, know that I will include a link to Angela's LinkedIn profile in case you want to reach out to her. I'm sure she would love to hear from you and answer any questions that you have. And again, Angela, thank you for spending time with me today. And to our audience, thank you for spending time with us as well. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you.